Are you in business? Yeah? Yeah. Most people who start a business do it on their own. But what happens when you get other people involved in your process? All those wonderful creatives and the people who are doing what you pay them to do are not your employees anymore, are they? More often than not, they are self-employed. People you pay on the spot market. But are they really? 3 years ago, a client came to me and he asked me, can you help me raise £125,000 in 7 days? I had to tell him no. If I had £125,000, I'd have better shoes. He had that kind of tension in his voice you get when you've got a real problem. And he was looking for that kind of money because the taxman wanted it from him. 5 years before that, he'd asked me to review his contracts with his subcontractors. He had a great business. It was a pilot training school. He did all the marketing, he hired the planes, and when he had a customer, he told the instructor when to turn up and who to teach. He also arranged for the customer to pay him, and he paid his freelancers. I had a look at his contracts and I said to him, we've got a little problem here, darling. In England, people's status as employee or self-employed is defined by how you work with them. Otherwise, there'd be no such thing as employment law, would there? Because we'd all go, you self-employed. The taxman looks at what you actually do. So I gave him a little report and I told him what he needed to do. And he went away. You're a busy entrepreneur, and you're a busy entrepreneur. You'll walk away. And he put my report in the drawer. A year after that, he rang me up and he said, I've had a problem with one of my freelancers and I let him go. And the daftest thing has happened to me. I've got something called an employment tribunal application in the post. Can't be right. I don't have any employees. So we had a little conversation and I took him back to my report and I said to him, this is how it works. If it looks like a duck, it walks like a duck, and it quacks like a duck, chances are it's the duck. So if you treat people like employees and you work them like employees, guess what? They're an employee. But even if they're not, do you know that people you contract personally with to provide services are workers as far as the EU is concerned? We think self-employed, employed, but there's a group of people in the middle called workers, and they have a full set of discrimination rights amongst many other things. So my guy said, this is stupid, I don't have any employees, and submitted his own tribunal defence saying, I have no staff. 3 months later, he got the decision. You've guessed it, haven't you? First of all, they found that he discriminated against this contractor for reasons I'll tell you about later, but also they decided this woman was really an employee. He was relatively lucky because she was part-time and she didn't earn a lot, so that cost him £2,500. Have you got that sort of money in the bank to pay out today if that happens to you? He wasn't happy. He had to go home and tell his wife, you know that dream holiday we were going to have after all the work we've done? It's gone. But he thought, I can live with that. I'm an entrepreneur. I can suck it up. I can work harder. I can make this right. Wouldn't you think that? 6 weeks after that, the revenue came to him and they said, we want back pay as you earn, and interest on the money you didn't pay on that woman. and on all 13 of your self-employed people who are on the same contract. So now my guy is looking for 125 grand at a week's notice. Could you raise that sort of money? We think as entrepreneurs, we're in the new business model and we've sidestepped HR compliance because it's boring and it pins us down. And we live in a freelance world and it's all fine like the Wild West. But it's not really what you think it is. Part of that reason is that we suffer from the entrepreneur's myth. When have you been to a conference and some big name entrepreneur has said to you, I did it my way. When they told me it couldn't be done, I couldn't be stopped. You know that guy, and it's always that guy, isn't it? You will never hear from the 10,000 people who failed to follow sensible advice who went bankrupt because they can't afford to get into the conference and they're not going to be asked to speak. I believe in a positive attitude, but it's like saying gravity doesn't exist, so I'm going to jump out the window. There are attitudes and there are realities. The world we live in is a freelance world, isn't it? Where are these people? Nobody knows, right? They could be your team, couldn't they? Where are they working? As it happens, this is a team of entrepreneurs sitting in a cafe in Johannesburg. How many people do you think are in this meeting? Well, you can count the people, but actually there's twice that number of people because the rest are virtually there. This is the world we live in. No compliance, no rules, no regulations. Or is it? If you're building a business where you offer customer service 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, is it wise to have all the people who service your customers on freelance contracts? What happens if as freelancers they all say, thank you very much, I don't want to come in on Monday, or thank you very much, I don't want that project. Freelancing is fabulous, it's flexible, it's creative, but it has to be managed just as seriously as any other form of people relationships. Who owns the copyright in what your freelancers produce? They do, unless you've contracted otherwise. Can you sell product to people, your end client, if you haven't got the rights to the things your freelancers created? If you can, it's a bit shonky, and you'll certainly find it'll come back to bite you. And what about that wonderful £5 graphic artist you found on Fiverr? You know, the guy in the Philippines who gave you a logo. What's to stop him using the identical logo for your biggest rival tomorrow? The freelance world is not just a Wild West world, it can be a dangerous world because we think we know what we're doing. Where is the data on your customers? Why do you care? Do you want it all to be sent to Russian mafia people and Nigerian scammers? Are you sending it to external people with no idea of how secure your data is? It is the Wild West, but you don't want to be the guy who loses the fight at the OK Corral, do you? Did you know that if you're using customer data, the Information Commissioner does not permit you to send it outside the EU unless you notify those customers, ensure that it's securely held, know that it's in an area where there's proper data rules, and you have checked what's going on and have a contract. Not every opportunity to get the cheapest possible VA at the other end of the world is a wise one. And when you're not happy with a freelancer, what do? You just stop using them, don't you? You just stop picking up the phone and you just stop having those conversations. Now, remember my guy with the pilot school? He did that But what he didn't know on that particular day was why the customer had complained about the instructor. Would you like to guess? This instructor happened to be my client's only female instructor and the only black one. And his customer had made a very unpleasant pass at this woman, and she had quite understandably not accepted it. It turned out that the customer complaint was a malicious get back on a woman who had turned him down. If my client had had a way of having a conversation about what was going wrong, he wouldn't have stopped ringing that woman and booking her. Now, if someone is not booked because they won't sleep with your customers, we call that sex discrimination in this country. If someone is not booked because they're the only person of a particular colour and you won't use them, we call that race discrimination in this country. And all those rights apply to workers. So how do you give yourself the flexibility that you need without walking into this Wild West world? I think you need real agreements with the people that you pay. What do I mean by real? I've got a simple acronym for you. It has to be realistic. If it looks like employment, acts like employment, you treat it like employment, let's call it employment and not kid ourselves, it's self-employment. Are you realistic about what you want your people to do? If you're buying a cheap graphic designer off an online site, do you really expect them to do the same job as someone who's at the state of their art, who's highly seasoned and professional? You need to make sure that you are asking the right people to do what you need to be done. Why do you care? I hear stories of people who've commissioned websites that don't work. They had a 500 quid budget and they wanted a 50 grand project done, and they got it done by some bloke in Romania. Lovely. I've got nothing against blokes in Romania, but when things go wrong, you don't even know where he lives. When things go wrong, you can find out you don't have copyright in the graphics they put up. You can also find out you don't even have logon codes to your website and they can take you down. This isn't fantasy. This happens in the online digital world. You need to make arrangements for how this is going to end. A freelance arrangement, by its very nature, is temporary. There's no freelance for life, is there? And the best time to plan your breakup is when you're dating. What don't you want when this relationship ends? Remember my guy with the flying school? Remember the woman he had to pay that money to? She sat up next door to him with the money he had to pay her and pitched to all his customers, because she knew who they were, apart from the one bloke, obviously. And so not only had he lost a lot of money, but he now had a rival, and there was nothing he could do about that. She wasn't an employee, there were none of the implied rights. Is this what you're setting up in your business when you're asking people, just do this, just do that? Have a plan for how it ends. Keep your data, keep your customers, keep your logon codes. And it needs to be appropriate. You don't need to write War and Peace if you just want 15 pages of something transcribed. But if you're using freelancers as the model for your business, make sure your contracts and arrangements are appropriate for your customer service goals and your business goals. Ever used a freelancer and thought, why do I have to keep telling them what to do? Does it irritate you that you pay people and they don't seem to get what you want done? There's two reasons for that. Firstly, when we buy freelancers, we're buying either overload space because we're too busy, or expertise. When we're buying overload space, we don't bother to specify properly what we want because we're too busy. When we're buying expertise, we don't specify what we want because they're the expert. But if you don't give the people you pay working parameters about what delights you, what pleases you, they will come back with stuff you don't like. And with respect, you are on strike as the boss. If you're paying people and engaging them in your process, your job is to tell them what to do, or at the very least to tell them what they need to achieve. If you don't want to do that, how are you going to get value from the people that you pay? And you really do need to consider the legals. It's not quite as simple as because I say it's all self-employed it is. The taxman has a view on that. Any idea what the taxman's idea of what self-employment is? It's a bit more than they invoice me. The taxman looks at, are they really in business for themselves? Do they have a web page? A business card? Are they registered as a business? Do they have more than one client? Do they use their own equipment? And even do they carry their own professional indemnity insurance? There's a bit more to how the taxman looks at it than Susan told me she just wanted to invoice me every month. That way you can build up massive liabilities you don't know. And why do I care? Because that day, my guy who wanted £125,000, I couldn't help. It was too late to prevent him from making these false assumptions. He couldn't go back to his customers and say, I fundamentally underpriced my labour costs. Please give me another 20% on the work I did for you for the last 5 years. You can't do that either. Do you know that workers have the right to statutory holidays? Any one of them can come back to you and say, I want my holiday pay. Now, maybe they're dead in the water with you as a freelancer if they do that. But maybe if you've just ended badly anyway, that's another problem that is going to be added to that little tick the box list. I believe passionately that the freelance economy is a vibrant one that we should all embrace. But I believe we should embrace it in a way that allows us to build robust businesses, not just imagining, that's all right, Fred's a freelancer. I invite you to download my freelance top tips. If you're into QR codes, there's the code there. If you prefer, you can text this number, 07786 2000236, and add your email address to that text. The heading of the text should be freelance, and you will get some top tips on how to manage the freelancers you pay. Do yourself a favour and get the advice I charge the pilot £500 for free, and do what he didn't have the sense to do. Please don't ignore it. Now, we haven't got a massive audience, but if you want to ask me questions, I'm more than happy to talk it through. Is that big enough for you? You got it? Yeah. So, is there anything that's made you think about? You're a long way away. Indeed. Absolutely, yeah. Absolutely. We all work globally, either as part of a big corporation or from our back bedroom on our PC. I was trading globally this morning on my mobile phone, as it happened, right? We don't think borders and boundaries. We think data flow and relationships, don't we? And I think we should. The problem is the government doesn't, and rightly so, I think. You can't be sending your customer data all over the world just because you can. Well, you can, but you run the risk of being fined. Do you know what the data protection fines are? Currently, they're £100 a breach. And if you're sitting there thinking, I can handle that. If you send 1,000 emails in breach of the rules overseas, that's 1,000 breaches. And if 4 people read them, that's 4,000 breaches. So it can kind of add up. And the only way you can do that is have a proper data security policy and proper contracts. And you need to know where your data is physically. Do you know? Because we're all in the cloud, aren't we? Where physically are the servers? Because the EU, like the UK, is a physical space, not a virtual space. And they're concerned with physical locations. And here's the thing. Do you think you're running a virtual team? I don't know that there's any such thing as a virtual team. I think there's only real people and real teams. The fact they don't come and sit in your office every day makes no difference whatsoever to the fact you need to contract them properly, you need to secure your data, and you need to build a relationship across that real agreement that enables you to do what you want. And if you're not doing that with the greatest possible respect, you are on strike as a team leader and a boss, because that's what you need to do to get it all working in the modern world. So I hope I haven't depressed you too much. But it needs doing. We need to clean up, don't we? So I'm happy to end this talk if you're happy, or to take questions if you think I'm now depressed. Whatever works for you, talk to me in the real world and let's get it sorted out. Okay? Where's my guy? They've all gone. Yeah. Could be, yeah. I'm not a marketing bod.
I was just thinking, because
Yeah.
it's relevant. It's really relevant, but it's probably, they might just have seen that and think,
Yeah. That's it. So I don't know whether to do that bit again or what. Lots, but the idea was to talk with the people, you see. So there we are. Do you pay freelancers? Yep, sometimes. What sort of freelancers do you pay? Right. Do you have a great contract with them? No. Yeah. So you've got a mixtured model of HR, you've got people you pay, and freelancers as a kind of and another thing. You use them as the top up. Yeah. Are you aware of the fact that when you employ people, the copyright in what they produce automatically belongs to you, but when you use freelancers, the opposite is true? So unless you contract with your freelancers to own the copyright, you don't. Right? So you might want to have a strategy about when you contract out that either allows you to make sure you've got the right contracts in place, or that you don't contract out stuff you really care about the copyright for. You may also want, what line of business are you in? B2B marketing. Do you use people who are not on your payroll who access your databases, VAs, marketeers, stuff like that? No. Where physically are your servers? I don't want an actual address with a postcode. On site, yeah. So you do know you're not going to be moving that data outside the EU anytime soon? Yeah. You won't need to. So if you have a magic moment and you think we need a few VAs or a few admin assistants, very tempting sometimes to get them from the Philippines or wherever. They're really cheap. If your data's leaking outside the EU, you've got problems from a marketing point of view, because you know better than I do, if you're in B2B marketing, what the Information Commissioner thinks about securing your data. But although none of us would dream of doing it out the front end, you don't go, here's my database, take it and copy it, use it as you will. We often do it at the back end when we use freelancers, don't we? We think, I need a virtual assistant. Quick, give them the logon codes. Where is the virtual assistant? Well, it's a virtual world, isn't it? I've no idea half the time where mine is, That's how it works, isn't it? So, are there other people around your business that you pay but are not employees? Your bookkeeper? Maybe, right? A lot of people give their bookkeeper the keys to the business, right? We often do our bookkeeping in the cloud, don't we? So if you fall out with your bookkeeper, do you have the right to get the data back? I've been in business 34 years. I've probably had about 28 bookkeepers. I think I might be quite easy to fall out with. But the truth is, you need to make sure that you've got your data back and your logons back. And do you know that most of the modern cloud accounting packages, servers are based in America? I don't want to point out the blindingly obvious, but America is not in the EU. So you need to notify people if you're keeping financial data about them in America. But we don't, do we? Because it's all virtual and it's kind of in the cloud. But if you're going to build a robust business, you need to have some idea of the structures around how to manage freelance people. We tend to see employment as compliance, don't we? When you take on people, it's a big compliance piece. Yeah? But actually, it's not a compliance piece, is it? I mean, compliance comes into it, but that's not the real point, is it? Have you ever ate in a restaurant simply because they comply with food hygiene standards? No. You hope they do, don't you? But you actually go there because they do more than compliance, don't they? Have you ever chosen an accountant because he never ever once missed a deadline on a tax return? What, that you just get one with the milk every day? You're new. All right. So compliance is not really a big deal with HR, but it's sold like that, isn't it? If you were hiring people for your team, what would be the biggest thought in your mind? Do the job well. Good team fit. It wouldn't be, oh my God, I hope they don't sue me, would it? It probably wouldn't be, oh my God, I hope I don't injure them. Because actually the whole compliance piece is the detail, isn't it? But when it comes into the relationship, it's normally already gone wrong. If your boss starts saying to you, excuse me, let's have a look at your contract. What time are you contracted to start? Are you having a positive relationship with your boss? No way. The compliance piece is something that as entrepreneurs, we need to get right and then put in a drawer until trouble comes, Then we need to manage the relationship and the work, don't we? Like there's no tomorrow. Because if the people you pay hate you, they don't work very well for you. Have you noticed this? Yeah. Now, posh people in HR call this engagement. That's because they're into compliance. And apparently, if you and I have a conversation, if we put an HR label on it, that's engagement. I call it having a chat, which is what people have been doing since people were invented, isn't it? But if you can't have a little chat with the people you work with, what's going on in your workplace? Nothing good, is it? If you're all zipped up and uptight, it's not going well. So the whole people piece is a lot more than compliance, isn't it? And personally, and I'll say this on, recordable medium, I think business people have been sold a pup about HR and employment law. I think we've been so focused on, someone might sue us. We're like the restaurant that won't open our doors. We're like the people who won't put our website up because a comma's missing on our terms of trade. This is not having a life and creating businesses and employment. This is just paranoia, isn't it? But in the freelance world, we don't even have any common sense. We go straight from paranoia to, over here it's lovely, I can do what I like. And that's not always wise, is it? Because actually people are just as weird and difficult and challenging when they're freelancers, aren't they? As they are when they're employees. The only thing that changes, oddly enough, is the boss has more default legal rights than the client. Because you know in B2B, it's not like B2C where the law says, oh, consumers should be protected from their idiocy. In B2B, if you're the idiot, you pay. It's about how it works, isn't it? So what's your biggest problem with people in your business? Yeah, time. Thank you for joining us. Well, I'm going to wrap this up. I can't make myself heard over the next speaker anyway. Thank you very much for joining me, and I really appreciate your support.